regular life, rightly don't. The only reason that we need to know anything about it is because it is such a threat to us. But when we do find anything about it, you will generally have to agree that it's as boring and fruitless and meaningless as anything can be. The so-called Austrian economists, for instance, you won't believe this. I mean, most people have an I'm shocked by this. I mean, even though I know it already, when the idea comes in my head, I'm just shocked by this. But do you know what Austrian economists believe? That you can't use math. You cannot use math to identify issues in economy, to assess them, to solve them, to prove solution. Can't be done.
Well, what they mean by that surely is they can't do it.
Well, that's very obvious when you actually rub elbow, and that's what this guy Republica is all about. You know, he's trying to, he talks in circles, and he basically believes somehow that he's disproven mathematically perfected economy by talking in circles, in which he goes around a cycle where he says, well, it's mathematically impossible to say the things that you're saying, so you have to prove them to me. But I gave them in a proof. In the form of the proof in the first place, but it's just as in any other proof. If you prove the Pythagorean theorem, which is that the sums of the squares of the sides of a right triangle equals the square of the hypotenuse, that still a person has to understand the proof to understand that it's a proof. You can't just say because I don't believe that math can be used that nothing is a proof, in which is basically summarizes his intellectual technique. And the truth of the matter is this: mathematics is such a fundamental science that probably no other science can exist without math. And it's known by anyone who can use math as a legitimate tool what the limitations of their approach are. And a lot of people in normal everyday life may not be aware that there are basically two branches of mathematics as applies to problem solving. And one is just the conventional mathematics that we know of, which includes algebra and even calculus. But generally, the problems of the world are very simple. E equals mc squared is simple. Mathematically perfected economy is simple. It's two things. It's eradication of interest and an obligatory schedule of payment at the rate of consumption or depreciation of the represented property. In other words, you pay for the house as you consume of it without interest. That's mathematically perfected economy. And the other thing I guess you need to remind me to come back to this is, how do we solve our problems? How do we transition between the present systems which have been imposed upon the world and mathematically perfected economy? I need to make a mental note to come back to that. But anyway, these two branches of mathematics are conventional mathematics, or mathematics, and numeric methods. And numeric methods are a matter of solving a problem, and you have to put a little asterisk by the word solving here, because we do not know that the solution is absolute in the case of numeric methods. And basically what numeric methods are, well, they're typified by ballistic science, for instance, where we have a tremendous amount of data about recorded downrange velocities for a given projectile, so that we know it has a muzzle velocity, and then it has a downrange velocity of this at 100 yards, and this at 110 yards, and this at 1100 yards, etc. And so if we graph all that, it comes out to maybe a complex curve. And what numeric methods are about is that they replicate the curve. They don't have anything necessarily to do with an actual understanding of the involved phenomena, whatever they may be. They simply, from an observed empirical pattern, are a mathematic method of interpolating any interior point, that is the rate of deceleration at 1,053 yards for the next yard, or from any point beyond that. And in other words, we could guesstimate, though we've only tested from muzzle velocities at 3,000 feet per second, we can guesstimate what they're going to be because they were increasing, rates of deceleration as we back up from 2,900 feet up to 3,000 feet per second. And we can estimate at that rate of increase what the possible rate of deceleration would be beyond the known observed range. Those are numeric methods. Now, the thing about numeric methods is they may not account for exceptions, but so long as no exception is known, they're generally assumed to hold, and with skepticism, particularly beyond the ends of known ranges. But this method of determining the maximum possible lifespan of any economy is not numeric methods. It's conventional mathematics. All that my models did was you start out at point 1, and you define what the period is, and you define what the interest rate is, and how much you want the circulation to increase or decrease over that period. The increase, of course, would be borrowed further, and the decrease wouldn't be borrowed back in, at least if it was less than what we were paying out of circulation in the way of principal and interest. And all the model does is pay interest and principal out, borrow it back, so that it maintains whatever circulation you want. And I asked the Reagan administration, they asked me, 2 years into his first administration, they became concerned that all of my projections were coming true, already proven true. And I'm probably the reason that David Stockman resigned from the Reagan administration. So they called me up out of the blue and asked me, in the course of a lengthy discussion, where they were basically confirming that they were in trouble, just like I said. I told them that Reagan was going to accumulate more debt than any president before him had. And of course he did. In fact, I even predicted how long it would take him and how much he would accumulate. But and showed him why, 4 or 5 years before the facts. So in this conversation that we had, they asked me something which actually floored me. They asked me if I could predict how long it would take for the economy to collapse, and I was actually very offended by that. I was very suspicious, if you will, because what that question indicates is though the thesis that I had presented was, quite obviously on the money. What they were concerned with was how long they could get away with some other shenanigans before this collapse was upon us. And, in other words, was Reagan going to be culpable? Perhaps might have been a consideration. And I just played along, in truth. Because I didn't want to ruin any opportunity that I might have to. I'm trying to save my country, not just my country. The world. Any country that does this eventually is going to save the world, because the first country that's so righteous and courageous to stand up against what really amounts to a few mere trivial evil people who have no power. No real power against us, but the first country to do that is going to seal the fate of the world, because every other country will be more emboldened to do this, and will realize, that it has to do this. Because, for instance, let's just say we converted to, mathematically perfected economy in Ireland. Well, I'll talk about that in a second, actually. We could, in Ireland would prosper immediately to a degree that we can express and predict mathematically in very plain terms that we can all understand. But anyway, the Reagan administration asked me if I could predict this, how long this failure would take to transpire. And I said, well, actually I could calculate it with exceeding accuracy if you tell me given these conditions. This is what interest rates the Federal Reserve will, they're not actually the federal government. This name federal is a purpose lie. They're 12 private corporations that, most people don't even know the real owners of. And so what they asked me was an offense to me. And nonetheless, I responded that I could calculate this maximum possible lifespan with great accuracy, possibly to within, certainly days of a point where it's theoretically impossible for the system to exceed that lifespan. It can only be sustained by these methods that I call artificial sustention, which, by breaking the rules of the actual system, pour money into circulation to keep it alive for a while longer so that the crime can exist for all that much longer. So when I asked them, what interest rates they were going to charge, they didn't even know what conditions might exist, much less how they would respond. And I said, well, very well, I've got an idea for logic that, your basic pattern of behavior is as the failure becomes more evident, and manifests to a clearer degree, and we suffer more, you tend to, raise or lower interest rates as you have to. As this debt gets greater, you have to lower interest rates continuously, and in effect, in the end, you have all this outstanding debt which is committed to rates of interest that you have no legal authority to reduce, and so you're stuck with that even though it's terminal. And so I explained all these things to them, and they were just kind of in awe, and their jaw was dropped. And I explained how I would develop some logic in which my models would continually reduce interest rates to just keep us within, maximal unearned profit for the central banking system and maximum suffering for us, which is basically the pattern of their behavior. As we begin to collapse, they reduce interest rates, and woe to the country that increases them, instead thinking fiscal austerity that they can't if they could service it now. I don't know why they're not, but then to impose greater payments on your people in a critical state is just utterly stupid. And we may find that this is true very soon from one of your near neighbors over there. But anyway, so how do we transition from this ancient system of usury? And by usury, what I mean is, I did a paper 30 years ago, which was a matter of a thing that I explained for 10 years prior. And the title of the paper was "Interest is Usury." It's been majorly plagiarized by the Ron Paul supporters, and it's stripped of its parts which invalidate the gold standard, and so that they can claim that gold is going to save us. And these guys were trying to, recruit me into their movement, and yet invalidating all the principles that you have to adhere to if you're going to succeed in solving the problem. Anyway, interest is usury. What does that mean? It means that basically it's a mathematic proof that there's no such thing as a non-usurious rate of interest, because any rate of interest which is profitable to a banking system, which serves this purpose of multiplying artificial indebtedness, inherently multiplies inherently and irreversibly. By irreversibly, what I mean is it's mathematically impossible for this process not to multiply continuously multiply artificial indebtedness so long as we maintain a vital circulation. The process of maintaining a vital circulation is with borrowing principal and interest back into circulation, which is the very process which increases the sum of artificial indebtedness periodically by so much as periodic interest on an ever greater sum of debt. So anyway, I produced a model for the Reagan administration, and I use very conservative numbers, and this idea of and it gives the current years the probable maximum lifespan of this pretended economy. And back then I had already published a mathematic prescription for immediate and costless transition from a system of usury into mathematical